Welcome, everybody. It's the new slot, IMGL. Thanks to WH Partners for an excellent morning. 2 masterclasses, as Mark said. I'm going to kick on because we're running a little bit behind. Heading of this panel is nurturing institutional government relations with regulators. And we're going to look at 4 countries. I'm going to kick off with probably the most exciting, structured, well-considered and visionary jurisdiction on our panel today, and that's the UK. Nurturing might be a little bit of a misnomer. Perhaps in our current environment in the UK, we could do with something like a 24,000-volt shock to every part of the ecosystem. Dave McLeish, partner at Wiggin. Tell us a little bit about what's happening in the UK and why it is so fractured.
Okay, so we have a position in the UK market where the government announced a review of the main gambling legislation coming up 2 years ago now. We're still waiting for what they're going to say. In the meantime, the government's effectively collapsed, been through various prime ministers, former ministers now in jungles eating kangaroos, bits. And we find ourselves in a situation where there remains a lot of uncertainty. It's anticipated that the white paper, which will set out the government's proposals, will come through probably in Q1 next year. There are rumours it's not going to happen at all, but we'll see. The reason for the white paper and the reason why government relations in the UK industry are maybe at an all-time low really revolves around a number of factors. There is an increasingly strong political and media anti-gambling lobby in the UK, really quite vociferous and having a disproportionate impact on the way that the regulator is viewing the industry. I think a combination of that, a combination of admitting that the industry made a series of failings over the last 5 years, which has resulted in significant fines, coupled with a regulator who has at times got things really quite wrong. The regulator comes in from criticism, not just from the industry, but also from the government. So I think all those factors together have put us in a position where the government's concluded we need a reset, and that's what the Gambling Act review is supposed to do. Now, in terms of those relationships, actually, this white paper, in theory, should offer an opportunity for that reset. The BGC, the main trade body for the gambling industry in the UK, has done a much better job than the trade bodies had previously done in terms of lobbying, in terms of speaking to government, speaking to both the department in charge of the review, but also to the Treasury, to really try and ram home the importance of the sector, whilst also accepting there are inevitably changes that are going to happen and have to be made, but all on the basis of, hopefully, evidence and on the basis of proportionate changes which allow the industry to be sustained and to flourish. The relationship with the regulator is, although that seems to have been constructive and seems to be heading in the right direction, and the industry has offered up certain things in advance around affordability, around advertising, where we are with the regulator probably is at an all-time low. The regulator has gone from probably 10 years ago being in a position of what people saw as too light touch, perhaps not understanding the online industry enough, having only really regulated land-based previously. They've taken a very aggressive approach towards enforcement, and more than that, they've taken a very aggressive approach to raising standards which are just not law. They are basically trying to push through on operators and suppliers their version of what regulation should look like, not what the law actually says, particularly around AML, where they seem to have a slightly puritanical view compared with actually other sectors, compared with the EU framework upon which the guidance is supposed to implement for the sector. And we're probably in a position where, unlike with other regulators in the UK, the Financial Conduct Authority, you can't speak to the Commission anymore. It's a closed-door policy, not an open-door policy. You used to be able to get guidance, you used to be able to get a steer, there used to be collaboration. It's gone. My hope is that the white paper, once the government says what it wants, it allows the regulator to say, stop moaning at me, to the industry, this is what the government have told us we need to implement, and that allows a more collaborative relationship going forward, but I am not overly hopeful.
Thank you, David. just turning to Greta, head of regulatory affairs at Betsson Group, but trying to distill and just think about what David said about the UK industry and trying to vision what good looks like from a regulatory perspective. Collaboration, quality of staff. If you look at the FCA as a comparator in the UK, that jurisdiction can create models that are effective and workable, but quality of staff, subject matter expertise, engaging in the industry, open door policy, as you said, welcoming the industry to come and talk to it about issues. It also has an active dialogue, and it is willing to have secondments from foreign regulators, these are financial services regulators, and also from industry. So they're trying to hit about issues such as best practice and also engendering trust in the industry. So if it can work in some sectors in the UK, we are really perplexed, those of us who have clients and operate in the UK, wonder why it is so fractured. From your position as head of regulatory affairs at a very large, successful group, what is your perspective of how Sweden and Malta, where you are currently working, approach the whole issue of effective collaboration?
Yes, indeed. I mean, if we look at the Maltese regulator and policy makers, traditionally they have always had an open approach vis-à-vis the industry, an open door policy, and a sense of needing to understand what the needs of the industry also are in order to come up with evidence-based and effective regulation. So I think that collaboration has gone a long way, not just on a local legislative front, but even on global and European initiatives which affect the Maltese gaming sector. So, I mean, Malta has had grey listing over the last year, so that dialogue, the MGA used to come to the iGen meetings and regularly update the operators, and that dialogue was extremely important in giving the necessary confidence in the jurisdiction. And the same goes with, recent global initiatives over tax, as well as European legislation being discussed in Brussels. And as long as, the operators are able to speak to the regulator and policymaker, explain the impact, as well as discuss possible solutions, I think that open door policy gives rise to very good outcomes.
I think, again, just picking up a theme from you and from David, the regulators, our politicians and government, they owe a duty and a responsibility for an effective working industry. Now, of course, the industry has to play its part, and I think it has probably been lacking in any leadership or voice over the last couple of years. But picking up Italy, Quirino, Mancini, head of Tonucci and Partners Gambling, there must be an extra dimension here in terms of politics and politicians that you throw into the mix with Italy, on top of the points that Greta's been talking about.
Yeah, I would say that Italy is a good example of how things should not work in an ideal world, in terms of lack of sufficient dialogue, communication, and also trust between the industry and the establishment. I have in mind particularly the policymakers more than the regulator. The regulator, my regulator, the Italian regulator, very often I feel for them because they are in between. They take instructions from the politicians, from the minister, and then they need to talk to the industry. But they are a lame duck because they don't have any power. They just execute instructions that are given to them from the upper floors. And for as much as they would like to be a bit closer to the industry, which I'm not saying is necessarily the case, over time there have been regulators that were more industry-friendly, others that were a little bit more
Is that a countdown?
closed
Left.
and difficult to approach.
14.
But the fact of the matter is that they can do very little because it's the politicians, it's at ministerial level that things are not working. And when I say things are not working, I don't just put the blame on the politicians. Politicians are politicians all over the world. I think they, the times, at least in Italy, the times are over when being a politician was, kind of a special mission that you had to serve your community. I'm afraid to say it's no longer the case. Politicians, they just care about their garden, their constituency. They do not have a vision about things. Most of the times, the views that they have, particularly when it comes to the gaming industry, they are biased, they are ill-informed, and now I put the blame on the industry. There is not much effort, or I would say there is not a consistent, coherent effort by the industry to deliver to the politicians that kind of objective information, hard data, etc., on the basis of which politicians may be a little bit more educated when it comes to what the gambling industry is all about and how they should deal with it.
So no matter how good the regulator is, if the politicians aren't in community, there's a real issue in Italy.
See, the community means public opinion, means the media, means the people, consumers, users, and there is not enough flow of information, of right information going around, because when you talk about, if you check in the media, they will only talk about what's happening in the gaming industry if something wrong happened.
So
another scandal.
You have two worlds. You have two worlds happily coexisting or unhappily coexisting, the regulated and the political. Neither come together, but they exist and they survive, and it's a status quo that just lasts.
Yeah, it's a site navigation, I would say.
Stalemate. Now, ex-regulator, current advisor, regulators are coming in for a little bit of a tough call on this panel. Give us your perspective as an ex-regulator of where good should sit. What do you think about the battles between politics, policies, regulators, EU, and industry right now, from your perspective?
Well, there is the battle which Quirino was mentioning before, in terms of having two streets going on, maybe sometimes in parallel, but sometimes not even converging into the same place, which are the politicians and the regulators. A regulator has to work within a framework, a policy framework, a legal framework. And there is little latitude where a regulator can actually operate outside of that realm. Mm-hmm. The politicians are the ones that they're the lawmakers, and they're the ones that actually determine policy, that determine law. The issue is that there is a difference in the background and the motivation and the objective of a politician and the regulator. The politician is very much trigger happy in the sense that the actions that the politician works upon are based on triggers. If they want to regulate the sector, the trigger is either because they need more taxes or they need more employment to solve an issue, essentially. When it comes to other triggers, however, when they try to curb, is when there is, in the media, bad news sells a lot, and when you have, situations of people, getting hurt because of gambling, yeah, they actually take that trigger and go by the political or populist wave. The regulator has a different role to that. The regulator has an independent role that needs to be fulfilled in order for that law to be upheld. Yeah. The good thing about the regulator is that if there's a good regulator, the good regulator is there to listen to the industry and is there to refer to the politician. Now, if the politician doesn't listen to the regulator, that's a different story. But the regulator can have a very important role in forming policy as well.
And on that point, Greta, what can be done to improve? I mean, it's a very complicated dynamic, isn't it? Consumer welfare, public health bodies, regulators, governments, the press. What do you think can be done to create stronger vision and improved relationships between the industry and its regulator?
Well, I think as an industry, of course, being proactive and engaging with the regulator through dialogue, as well as moving towards the regulator when there are particular issues which can be dealt with together as an industry through codes of conduct. I think those initiatives definitely help. I think in engaging, it's not enough to say, no, this is a problem, but as an industry, we need to start saying, actually, these are some of the solutions we can actually provide. But it cannot be done by one or two operators. It needs to be done by the larger industry. And I think from the regulator side, of course, more can be done amongst regulators to actually speak to each other and share best practices. I think harmonization is not something which we can actually discuss nowadays, but at least we need to we do realize that when we're speaking to regulators which are opening markets, sometimes the level of understanding is actually very low. So I think that sharing of best practices amongst regulators and that knowledge building would help a more evidence-based type of regulation.
And people have to be open to change, which is why nothing can happen if people won't talk to each other, which is why a closed-door policy in the UK is so damaging, irrespective of other stakeholders' views in that market. Just very briefly, because I think we are, and I have to look at the time. What have we got?
20 minutes, I think that's right.
A minute, okay. This is a challenge for Quirino. I'm going to go quick. You've got 10 seconds. All right, what would be the single most important thing that you would want to see happening in Italy from your perspective, if anything, to just change direction? Not a solution, but change direction.
I would just like to see more communication. Very simple. I would like to see more opportunities where the politicians, the policymakers, the minister, and the regulator get together with the industry and they work together. Because at the end of the day, we are talking about a fully regulated, fully legitimate, fully legal industry. And it's a shame that we are in a situation like this one.
Yeah. David?
Yeah, I think collaboration and consultation. On the consultation in the UK has basically become an idea where the Gambling Commission tell you what they're going to do, and then you can say no, and then they do it anyway. So I think that's one thing. And then secondly, the pointless trading in the media of expensive reports which have been put together about, say, problem gambling on fundamentally flawed analysis to represent the parts that the arguments of either side, and it's like ships in the night.
And the perspective of a former regulator, now advisor. What? Choosing Malta or indeed another jurisdiction, or just a barometer for what is a good jurisdiction? What do you think are the important things to focus on to try and change direction of the relationship and the institutional health and well-being of all the key stakeholders in the industry?
I think the situation has to be flipped around, because we've been dealing with for the past 15 years on yes, we need to have more communication between the regulators, between the operators, between the politicians, but we've seen that there was a communication breakdown over and over and over. I think now is the time where the industry needs to pull up its socks and base its arguments on pure evidence and lobby, not the regulator, because the regulators don't need to be lobbied, but the politicians, who are the policymakers, in demonstrating that what they have in practice is actually an implementable element from policy element without them losing their face with the electorate, because that is what their politician is concerned about.
Thank you. I'm now over. Okay, I think we are done. My thanks to my panel. We're going to hand over now to, I think, Mark's next panel, but David, Reuben, Greta, Quirino, my thanks. Thank you all.